Welcome to Ancient Wisdom. My name is Socrates, and tonight I am going to talk about a man who walked this earth long before my own time, a wanderer, a poet, and a seeker of truth. His name was Xenophanes of Colophon. Before we begin, I invite you to rest. Let your shoulders ease, your breath grow slow. Let the noise of the day fall behind you like waves retreating from the shore. There is no haste here, no need to think too hard. Only to listen, softly, quietly, as if you are hearing the wind carry an old song through olive trees. The story I am about to share is one of courage and wonder. It is about a man who dared to question what all others accepted: the nature of the gods, the shape of truth, and the vanity of men. In his time, such questions were not philosophy, they were blasphemy. Yet Xenophanes asked them with a calm and steady heart, not to destroy faith, but to cleanse it of illusion. He was born in the city of Colophon on the gentle coast of Ionia, where the sea touched every thought and the poet spoke more powerfully than kings. It was an age when men believed that the gods walked among them, that Zeus ruled the skies with thunder, that Apollo struck with arrows of light, and that Athena whispered victory into a soldier's ear. The people sang of the gods in their likeness, with faces and tempers, loves and jealousies, feasts and quarrels. To them, the divine was a mirror of themselves. But Xenophanes looked at that mirror and saw only a shadow. He wondered, if horses could paint, would they not draw gods that looked like horses? If lions could sculpt, would their gods not roar? And so he began to travel, a wanderer with a lyre and a voice that carried questions instead of hymns. I have often thought of him, though he lived more than a century before I was born. His path was lonely, yet it lit the way for all of us who came after. In the great river of thought, he was among the first to dip his hands and say, "This water flows not from Olympus, but from within the human mind." Tonight I tell his story not to teach, but to remind. For in every age, men are tempted to shape truth in their own image, to call their desires divine, their opinions eternal, their fears sacred. Xenophanes whispered to the world, "The divine is beyond us and yet within us. It is the order that watches, the unity that never sleeps." He was not a philosopher as we think of one. No academy, no students, no dialogues in marble halls. He was a traveler who sang in markets and inns, carrying wisdom in his verses and courage in his silence. And yet I feel a kinship with him. For like me, he too was misunderstood, mocked, and forgotten by the many, but remembered by the few who listened deeply. If you close your eyes now, you may picture him. An old man walking by the Ionian shore, his cloak faded, his sandals thin, his eyes watching the sea. He pauses to look at a shell pressed in stone, the trace of a creature long vanished. He smiles faintly, for he knows this means the earth was once under the sea. He sees in it not myth, but truth, a truth that sleeps patiently until a mind awakens it. And I, sitting centuries later under the same stars, feel his thought touch mine, as if across the silence of ages one soul had called to another. He showed us that faith and reason need not be enemies, that to honor the divine is not to imagine its form, but to sense its mystery in all things, in the stars that move without haste, in the tide that obeys no mortal will, in the stillness that listens beyond words. So as we begin, breathe gently. Let your mind rest as Xenophanes once did upon the wide Ionian waves. Let us walk together through his life, slowly, step by step, not in search of argument, but of understanding. For tonight, we remember a man who looked at heaven and dared to ask, is it truly the gods who resemble us, or are we the ones who have made the gods in our own image? And in that question, softly spoken across time, philosophy was born. Before the dawn of what we now call philosophy, there was song. The wisdom of Greece lived in the verses of poets, in the rhythm of the lyre, in tales that danced between gods and men. Every truth was sung, not spoken, and so it was shaped by feeling more than thought. In those days, before Xenophanes was born, the people believed that knowledge came from the muses, those divine daughters of memory who whispered inspiration into mortal ears. A poet was not a thinker but a vessel. His words belonged to heaven, not to himself. Homer and Hesiod were not questioned. They were revered, for they had painted the world with divine color. The gods they described were many, and they were near. Zeus hurled lightning in anger. Poseidon shook the seas in jealousy. Aphrodite stirred desire like wind upon fire. They loved and betrayed, quarreled and feasted, rejoiced and mourned, just as mortals did. The people worshipped these gods because they saw themselves in them. And yet they were blind to what that meant. It was a time of beauty and blindness together, a time when imagination ruled the mind, and reason was only a faint ember in the dark. To question the poets was to question truth itself, for their verses shaped the hearts of cities. A child grew hearing of Zeus's thunder and Hera's wrath long before he learned the law of the polis or the measure of justice. The soul of Greece was woven with myth. But myths, my friend, are like clouds, lovely to behold, yet they change their shape with every passing wind. It was into this sky of shifting stories that Xenophanes was born. He came into the world around the 6th century before my time, an Ionian child beneath a sun that never tired of shining upon thought. The Greeks of Ionia were curious, restless minds. They watched the tides, the stars, the changing of seasons. They began to wonder not only what the gods did, but why the world was as it was. Thales had said all is water, Anaximander spoke of the boundless, and Anaximenes of the air. Yet these were whispers, not yet the music of reason. And still the poets sang louder. In every city, the people gathered in symposia, feasts of wine and laughter, where rhapsodes recited the tales of heroes and gods. These stories gave meaning to victory and comfort to sorrow. When lightning struck a tree, it was Zeus's hand. When the harvest failed, Demeter grieved. The world was full of divine moods. But one day, a man named Xenophanes, still young and curious, began to listen differently. He heard in the hymns a kind of vanity, that mortals had made heaven their mirror. He saw that when a man imagined God, he saw not the infinite but his own reflection crowned with power. This thought did not come as rebellion but as wonder. Why, he asked, should the eternal behave like a jealous man? Why should perfection dwell in stories of anger and deceit? If there is truly a divine mind, would it not be beyond all these? These were dangerous questions. In a world ruled by custom, questions are the first form of courage. And Xenophanes, though poor and exiled, carried this courage quietly, like a flame hidden under his cloak. I often imagine him sitting at the edge of a gathering, listening as a poet praised the glory of Zeus. When his turn came to sing, he would lift his voice not in worship but in reflection. He would sing of one God, not manlike, not womanlike, but pure being, infinite and whole. The people would murmur, some smiling, some frowning. They would say, "He mocks the poets." Yet he did not mock, he simply saw deeper. He saw that truth cannot be shaped by imagination alone. And as he wandered from city to city, his verses became quiet seeds of thought. Some fell on hard ground and were forgotten. Others took root in the minds of those few who were ready to see beyond appearances. That was the age before philosophy, when myth was law, and the daring of a single question could shake the temples of belief. So when I speak of Xenophanes, I speak of a man who looked upon the world of poets and said softly, "There is something more." And that whisper, carried by wind and memory, became the first breath of wisdom. Colophon, his birthplace, was a city of light and song, one of the jewels of Ionia, where the sea breeze carried the scent of salt and wild thyme through its narrow streets. The people there lived with a rhythm as ancient as the waves, trading with distant lands, writing poetry, and worshiping their familiar gods. It was there that Xenophanes first opened his eyes to the world, a world filled with splendor and uncertainty. He saw temples rising over marble hills, their columns gleaming in the dawn. He heard poets sing praises to Zeus and warriors boast of victories. He saw men chase fame as though it could shield them from death. Even as a boy, his mind was awake. He listened deeply, and what he heard planted a quiet question in his heart. What is truly divine, and what is only man's dream of divinity? But his youth was not meant for comfort. War came to Colophon, the advance of mighty Persia, whose shadow stretched across the Aegean. Many fled, and Xenophanes was among them. He left behind his city, his friends, perhaps even his family, carrying little more than his lyre and his verses. He became what few men choose to be, a wanderer, unanchored to land or home, belonging only to the road. I imagine him walking along dusty paths that led through the cities of Ionia, Ephesus, Smyrna, and farther west to the mainland of Greece. In each place he would pause in the agora, where merchants shouted prices and philosophers debated in the sun. There he would lift his voice and the crowd would quiet. His words were not like others. They carried no flattery for kings or praise for heroes. He sang of thought, of measure, of humility. He traveled from feast to feast, from symposium to symposium, reciting poems that puzzled and stirred his listeners. He was not a beggar of coin but of attention, and attention he knew was a rarer gift than gold. At times he slept beneath porticos or under olive trees, the stars his only company. Yet, in that solitude, his mind was alive with reflection. Many poets sought favor with nobles or patrons, but Xenophanes did not serve the wealthy. His loyalty was to truth, though truth offered no shelter. I have always believed that wisdom and wandering are kin. For when one walks the earth without possession, he begins to see what cannot be owned, the vastness of thought, the equality of all under the same sun. There were days when Xenophanes performed at banquets of laughter and wine. The guests, flushed with drink, would call for songs of heroes and gods. Instead, he would play his lyre and sing of moderation. The wise man honors measure in all things. Let no cup overflow, nor pride grow too tall. For even the gods love the man who walks humbly. At first they would laugh, but as the melody flowed, a stillness would spread, a hush that only truth can bring. Some would turn away, others would nod in silent thought. The poet's task was never to please, but to awaken. His feet grew old before his fame did. For more than 70 years he traveled, a living bridge between the age of myth and the birth of reason. Each step was a verse, each city a line in the poem of his life. He spoke to sailors who believed the sea was ruled by Poseidon, and to farmers who prayed for Demeter's blessing. To both he said gently, "Look deeper, for the divine needs no shape, no story, no anger, no bribe." I often think of how the road must have felt beneath his feet, the rough stones, the burning dust, the cool touch of evening air. A man without a home, yet at home everywhere. He belonged not to Colophon nor to Greece, but to truth itself. And though he had no disciples, no school, no marble hall of teaching, his words traveled farther than his footsteps. They lived in the minds of those who heard and pondered, sailors, farmers, poets, and later philosophers. Perhaps that is the purest form of teaching, not to gather students, but to scatter seeds. When I, Socrates, walk through the streets of Athens and question men about virtue, I sometimes feel the presence of Xenophanes in my silence, that same unyielding spirit which refuses to accept the world's stories without reflection. So tonight, as we follow his journey, imagine him walking beside the sea, his cloak fluttering in the wind, his eyes gazing not upon Olympus, but upon the endless horizon. For Xenophanes was not merely a traveler of lands. He was a traveler of thought, the first to set sail beyond the gods of men toward the vast sea of the divine unknown. There are moments in every age when a single voice rises above the noise of tradition, not to shout, but to question. Xenophanes' voice was such a one. He was not loud, nor proud, nor bitter. He spoke with a calm certainty, and yet his words carried a quiet thunder. For he dared to laugh, not in mockery but in wonder, at the gods men had made in their own image. In every city he entered, the same songs were sung. Poets praised Zeus, who ruled the heavens with temper and desire. They told of Hera's jealousy, of Apollo's wrath, of Ares' delight in war. These were stories the people loved, for they saw themselves in them. They could worship without changing, believe without questioning. But one evening, at a gathering where the air was heavy with wine and incense, Xenophanes was asked to sing. The guests expected another tale of Olympus, another song of divine adventure. Instead, he lifted his lyre, smiled gently, and said, "If oxen or lions had hands to draw and shape as men do, then horses would draw their gods like horses, and oxen like oxen, each giving the divine their own form." The room grew silent. A few laughed, unsure if it was jest or blasphemy. Others frowned, their pride stung. But Xenophanes continued, his voice slow and steady, like a stream flowing over stone. "The Ethiopians say their gods are flat-nosed and black. The Thracians that theirs have blue eyes and red hair. Yet there is one God, greatest among gods and men, who is not like mortals in body nor in thought." That night, something shifted in the air, as if the very walls of myth trembled. He was not mocking the gods. He was mocking the arrogance of man. The people had built heaven in their own image, painted the eternal with mortal colors. Xenophanes, with gentle humor, brushed that paint away to reveal a deeper mystery, that what is divine must be beyond likeness, beyond shape, beyond anger or hunger or passion. When I, too, began to question the stories of my own time, I often remembered him. For laughter, when born of truth, can be the softest way to wake a sleeping world. He would travel from place to place, sharing his verses. Some welcomed him, others turned him away. Priests muttered against him, saying he disrespected the sacred. But Xenophanes did not attack faith, he purified it. He saw that to honor the divine is not to invent gods who behave like us, but to recognize the perfection that no image can capture. He once said that the greatest God sees all over, thinks all over, and hears all over. No palace, no temple could contain such a presence. It did not walk, for it needed no motion. It did not speak, for it was pure understanding. This was not poetry of rebellion, it was poetry of awakening. I can imagine how lonely that must have been. To stand among men who find comfort in stories, and to say quietly, there is something higher. He was laughed at, misunderstood, and ignored. Yet he laughed too, for he knew that the truth does not need to be defended, it only needs to be spoken. In my own time, when I asked questions in the marketplace of Athens, people also smiled, thinking I was foolish. But I learned, as Xenophanes did, that wisdom often wears the face of folly to those still asleep. There is a kind of divine humor in seeing how men praise gods that resemble themselves. They imagine Zeus with a beard like theirs and call it reverence. They paint the heavens in their own likeness and call it devotion. Xenophanes saw through that illusion and smiled, not to insult but to teach through gentle irony. He taught that truth must not be carved in stone idols or confined in painted myths. It must be sought within, in the stillness where thought meets wonder. So when you hear laughter and wisdom, do not mistake it for mockery. Sometimes the laughter of a wise man is the kindest way to show others how small their certainties are. Xenophanes laughed not at the gods, but at the blindness of men who thought they understood them. He taught us that reverence begins not in belief but in humility. And from that laughter, philosophy took another step forward, out of the shadow of myth and into the dawn of reason. There are truths so vast that they cannot be shouted, only whispered. Xenophanes was the first among our people to whisper that the divine might be one, not many, not clothed in story or shape, but boundless, changeless, eternal. He spoke these words softly, as a man might speak to the sea, knowing it would answer only with silence. He said, "One God, greatest among gods and men, not like mortals in body nor in thought." When I, Socrates, first read those verses many years later, I felt as if I had found a footprint older than memory itself, the mark of a mind that had walked ahead of us all. Xenophanes did not name this God, for names belong to men. He only said that it sees all, hears all, and moves all things by the power of its thought. Imagine that idea emerging in a world where Zeus still reigned from Olympus, where people sacrificed goats and bulls to win divine favor, where thunder was the voice of heaven and lightning the stroke of judgment. To stand in that world and say, "The divine does not move, for it is everywhere. It does not change, for it is perfect." This was not simply daring. It was revolutionary. And yet he did not preach, he reasoned. He asked gently but firmly, if the gods are born, who bore them? If they quarrel, who judges them? If they change, can they be divine at all? He showed that a God who feels anger or jealousy cannot be eternal, for all emotion passes like a shadow. He saw divinity as pure understanding, thought without body, order without need. It was the beginning of a new kind of faith, born not of fear but of reasoned wonder. In the evenings, when he sang these ideas to small gatherings, some would listen with awe, others with confusion. There were no temples for such a God, no statues, no hymns to sing. To worship the invisible required something deeper, silence, reflection, and the courage to face the mystery without an image to comfort the mind. Xenophanes said that the divine shakes all things by the thought of its mind. When I meditate on those words, I feel their truth in every breath. The world moves in harmony not because of divine hands, but because there is an intelligence woven into being itself, the same quiet reason that holds the stars in their courses and keeps the seasons faithful to their time. I often told my students in Athens that wisdom is knowing how little we know. Xenophanes knew this long before I was born. He said that no man can ever know the full truth about the gods or about the world. Even if he should speak what is true, he cannot know it as truth. All is woven with uncertainty, yet still we must seek. Is that not the beginning of philosophy itself? to seek without claiming, to question without pride? He believed the divine to be one, eternal, and beyond all form, yet he also believed that human knowledge of it would forever remain partial. In this, he was humbler than all the priests of his time. For where they claimed knowledge, he claimed inquiry. There is a sacred peace in such humility. It does not destroy faith, it purifies it. It teaches us that the holiest act is not to kneel before an idol, but to stand quietly before the unknown and listen. I sometimes imagine Xenophanes by the sea at dusk, the sky deepening into violet. He sets his lyre beside him and watches the horizon dissolve into light. He feels, as I often have, that the divine is not far away but everywhere, in the air that moves, in the wave that breaks, in the thought that wonders. He no longer needs a God with a beard or a throne. He has found a truth that is formless yet complete. And perhaps in that moment he smiles, for he knows that while men carve their gods from stone, the true divine has carved itself into all that exists. And so, the poet who once laughed at the gods now bows inwardly before something greater. Not Zeus, not Apollo, not Athena, but the Eternal One, unseen, unfelt, yet nearer than breath. That was the heart of Xenophanes' teaching. That what is divine cannot be imagined. It can only be sensed in the stillness of understanding. And if you listen now, truly listen, you may feel it too. That vast, gentle presence that moves the world, yet never moves at all. There was a time when Greece adored strength above wisdom. At every festival, men gathered to watch athletes wrestle, race, and throw the discus. The victors were crowned with olive leaves, their names sung in poems, their bodies sculpted in marble. The crowd cheered louder for speed than for thought, for muscle more than for mind. Xenophanes would stand among them, an old man by then, travel-worn and quiet, and watch the crowd's devotion. When the winner lifted his arms to the sky, the people would cry out, "Behold the glory of Greece." But Xenophanes did not cheer. He only smiled with a kind of sorrow. And when the noise faded, he would take up his lyre and sing a verse unlike any the crowd expected. If a man wins victory by the swiftness of his feet, it is less than wisdom won by calm thought. For our cities need not the strong of body, but the strong of mind. His words fell softly, yet they struck deep. The people turned, surprised, for none had ever said such things aloud. In those days, men believed glory was something you could see, the shine of bronze armor, the applause of crowds, the trophies hung in the temple. But Xenophanes spoke of a glory unseen, a triumph of understanding over pride. He was, in his way, Greece's conscience before Greece had won. He reminded us that the poet's duty was not to flatter men but to guide them. Wisdom, he said, is the strength that does not fade. He called vanity a fog that blinds the soul, a mirror that reflects nothing real. I too have seen how men chase praise as if it were truth itself. They boast of victories, wealth, beauty, yet the wise man knows that every applause fades with the next dawn. What remains is not what we have won, but what we have understood. Xenophanes knew that the mind of man can be more radiant than any athlete's body. He said, "Better to win with words of truth than to win in games of speed. For wisdom lifts the city higher than strength." When he sang this, some laughed, others muttered. A few nodded slowly, sensing that the poet's calm voice carried something the stadium's roar could not: permanence. He taught that vanity was the beginning of ignorance, that those who measure their worth by applause will never hear the still voice of reason. He said that the world honors too loudly those who conquer others, and too quietly those who conquer themselves. It was not an easy truth to bear. He saw kings proud of gold, soldiers proud of blood, poets proud of flattery. Yet none were proud of thought. To them, wisdom brought no feast, no fame, no garland, only solitude. But Xenophanes was content with that solitude, for he knew that understanding is its own reward. I have often wondered how it must have felt for him, standing in a world that prized victory and seeing clearly that the truest victories are invisible. Perhaps he felt, as I did in Athens, that most men live for the eyes of others, and few for the peace of their own soul. Once, they say, a young man mocked him, saying, "Old poet, can your verses throw a spear or win a race?" Xenophanes answered, smiling, "No. But they may still strike where no spear can reach, the mind." There, in those few words, lies the essence of his wisdom. Strength fades with the body, but thought endures. The athlete's glory ends when his limbs tire. The thinker's glory begins when his breath grows calm. And perhaps that is why even now, centuries later, we remember Xenophanes not as a champion of the games, but as a champion of the soul. He showed us that the race worth running is inward, that the true garland is woven of insight, not of olive leaves, and that humility, that quiet knowing of one's limits, is the finest form of strength. So when you hear the cheers of the crowd fade into silence, remember his voice rising softly above them. The wise man needs no witnesses. The light of his thought is its own applause. There are few joys as lasting as the joy of moderation. Xenophanes knew this truth as deeply as one knows the rhythm of breathing. Though he was a poet who wandered from city to city, he never desired gold, nor fame, nor the comfort of palaces. He sought only peace, the kind that grows quietly, like a tree whose roots drink from still waters. In his travels, he saw men who lived in great luxury. They drank from cups of silver and ate from plates of gold. They built houses with pillars as tall as ships' masts and filled them with statues of gods carved in marble. Yet when Xenophanes looked into their eyes, he saw restlessness, the same hunger that grows sharper the more it is fed. And so he sang of simpler feasts. He wrote verses that praised the humble gathering, where friends shared bread and truth in equal measure. Now that the floor is clean and the hands are pure, let us drink with moderation. Let there be no noise of excess, but gentle words of goodness. He believed that virtue and peace live in the same house, that when men chase wealth, they forget the richness of quiet company. That wisdom, like good wine, should be sipped slowly, never gulped. I understand this well. In Athens, when I spoke to my companions, I asked them not to seek luxury, but balance. I told them that virtue is the harmony of the soul, and harmony is lost when one string is pulled too tight. Xenophanes taught this long before my time. He was perhaps the first to see that happiness is not found in what one owns, but in how one thinks. He often sang at modest feasts, where simple men reclined upon straw mats, the air scented with olives and warm bread. There he spoke not of heroes or battles, but of gratitude. He would say, "Let us thank the divine not for abundance, but for enough. For it is not the full cup that brings peace, but the content heart." How rare such wisdom is, and how light it feels. His verses moved not with the weight of argument, but with the rhythm of breath. They were reminders, not commands, songs that drifted gently through the air and settled upon the listener's heart. He despised arrogance in all forms, the boast of athletes, the pride of kings, even the vanity of poets who sang only to be praised. He urged men to remember that beauty fades, power slips, and fortune turns like the wind. Only moderation endures, for it asks nothing of time. He once said, "The good life is not the loud one, but the quiet feast where justice pours the wine." I have repeated that line many times to my own students. It is a lesson the soul must learn again and again, that to be content is the highest art of living. At times, I wonder whether Xenophanes found this wisdom through hardship. Perhaps it was the road that taught him. When one carries little, one learns what truly matters. The stars become lamps, the earth a bed, and a crust of bread a banquet. A wanderer learns simplicity not as a virtue to be admired, but as a necessity to survive, and from that necessity, a deep serenity blooms. There is an image of him that I hold in my mind. He sits by a small fire at night, somewhere between cities. The sky above him is vast and unbroken. His cloak is worn, his sandals dusty. He has no audience but the wind. Yet he sings softly, not to be heard, but to remember. He sings of contentment, of gratitude, of the joy of being alive within the great stillness of the world. That, I think, is the essence of his philosophy, to live lightly upon the earth, to praise without pretending, to think without pride. And so, his life became his teaching, a moving poem carried by footsteps instead of ink. He taught that one can live wisely without renouncing joy, and live joyfully without abandoning wisdom. For to him, wisdom was not a cold pursuit of truth, but a warm embrace of balance, the gentle art of being satisfied with what is. There is a certain quiet that comes only to those who have walked far, not only upon the earth, but within themselves. Xenophanes knew that quiet well. For though his words carried across cities and seas, his heart often journeyed alone. In his youth, he had walked among crowds, his lyre in hand, his verses ready to stir the mind. But as the years unfolded, he began to feel the silence that follows the voice of truth. The world listens for a moment, then turns away to the easier songs. Wisdom, I have learned, is a companion of solitude. They say he lived to nearly 100 years. Imagine that, a century of wandering, a century of reflection, of speaking words that few were yet ready to hear. He was no man of war, no founder of cities, no ruler of men. He owned no temple, no disciples, no crown. And yet, within his heart, there burned a light that even kings could not extinguish, the light of inquiry, the courage to see. He wandered from feast to feast, city to city, welcomed in some, dismissed in others. There were times when he dined with nobles who listened out of politeness, not interest. Other nights, he slept beneath the stars, his lyre his pillow, his verses his only company. I sometimes think that the loneliness of the wise is not born of the world's cruelty, but of its sleep. For those who awaken early must walk long before the rest of mankind opens its eyes. He must have felt this, that peculiar ache of one who sees farther than others care to look. Yet he never grew bitter. In his verses there is no anger, only patience. He once wrote that no man has seen clear truth, nor will there ever be one who knows it, for all is but a woven guess. Those words to me are not of despair, but of serenity. To know that we live in partial light is to be free from pride. It is to accept that we are wanderers of thought, and that the road itself is our teacher. Sometimes, as I walk the streets of Athens and see men quarreling over shadows, I feel his presence in the quiet corners of my mind. He seems to whisper, "Ask but do not demand. Seek but do not clutch." Truth is a horizon, not a possession. Xenophanes' loneliness then was not emptiness. It was the stillness of one who listens to the silence between the stars. He did not resent being misunderstood. He pitied those who feared to question. And though his feet grew weary, his curiosity never dimmed. He learned to find comfort in the simplest companions, the sea that murmured beside him, the wind that answered his songs, the constellations that kept him company through the long Ionian nights. Each step became a prayer, each breath a kind of meditation. I often imagine him sitting by a small fire, watching the embers fade into night. He lifts his gaze to the heavens, not in worship, but in wonder. He sees the same stars that I too would one day see, and the same mystery that none of us have yet solved. Perhaps in that stillness he smiled. Perhaps he thought, if I am alone, I am alone with the infinite. There is a sacred beauty in that solitude. For those who seek truth must first walk away from noise, from approval, from comfort. Only in silence does wisdom begin to whisper. And though Xenophanes walked through a world that often ignored him, he left behind footprints that time could not erase. He showed that to be alone does not mean to be lost, that the mind, when guided by wonder, is never truly without company. I too have known the loneliness of the philosopher. To question is to walk a road few will follow. But I have learned from Xenophanes that solitude can be a kind of friendship, the friendship between a man and the vastness of thought. So if ever you feel alone in seeking truth, remember him, the old poet walking beneath the stars, whispering questions that echoed through centuries. For though his voice was solitary, it carried far, far enough to reach even me, and now through these words to reach you. In his long life upon the road, Xenophanes found his teachers not in men, but in the earth itself. Where others saw dust and stone, he saw stories. Where others saw the sea as only a path or a peril, he saw it as a timeless mirror, one that had watched the birth and fading of worlds. There is a tale often told about him, quiet but wondrous. They say that while walking near a rocky hill, he picked up a stone and turned it in his hand. Embedded within it was the faint shape of a fish, the bones of some ancient creature long vanished. He smiled, and with the same calm reasoning he brought to the gods, he said, "All things come from earth, and all things end in earth. This land was once sea." Those few words contained a revelation. For in a time when men still believed that mountains were eternal and the sea fixed forever in its place, Xenophanes saw change, not the chaos of myth, but the slow, patient rhythm of nature. He saw that the world had a memory, that the sea had risen and fallen, shaping the land like a sculptor molding clay. I often think how extraordinary that must have been, to see the fossils in the stones and understand their silent testimony. Others might have called them gifts of the gods or the remains of giants, but Xenophanes saw them for what they were, traces of life, pressed by time into the earth. He glimpsed what we would one day call the history of nature, the idea that the earth itself lives, changes, and renews. To him, this was not a challenge to faith, but an expansion of it. He did not say, "There are no gods." He said, "The divine works not through thunder or fire, but through the quiet order of the world." He found holiness in the laws that govern seas and skies, not in myth, but in harmony. He once said that men imagine the world to be as they wish, but the wise observe it as it is. He looked not to Olympus for answers, but to the horizon, to the wind that shaped the dunes, to the shells embedded in stone. Everywhere he saw the same message, that the divine is not a being but a balance. I too have often marveled at this. How easily men overlook the small signs that whisper truth. A leaf falling, a tide shifting, the turn of the seasons. These are lessons as clear as any spoken by a philosopher. Xenophanes listened to them with a poet's heart and a scientist's patience. He saw that the sea and the clay were not enemies but partners, one shaping the other, giving birth to all that lives. He saw unity where others saw division, law where others saw chance. And so, in that single thought, this land was once sea, he touched something profound, that all forms change but the essence remains, that the divine mind moves not through miracles, but through the slow, sure dance of nature. When I ponder his insight, I feel a deep peace. For what is philosophy if not the art of seeing what is hidden in plain sight? What is reverence if not wonder at the order of things? Xenophanes was the first to see the world as both poem and proof. He saw beauty and law entwined, the poetry of being written in the patterns of nature itself. Sometimes I imagine him standing upon a high hill, the wind carrying the salt of the Aegean across his face. He closes his eyes and hears the distant rush of waves, as if the sea itself were remembering its old dominion. He smiles, knowing that the earth beneath him once swam with life. And in that smile lies the gentlest wisdom, that to know the world is to love it as it truly is, ever-changing, ever-whole, shaped by a hand too vast to see. He did not need temples to feel divine presence. He needed only the quiet of the earth, and the knowledge that every stone was once alive with the sea's whisper. As Xenophanes grew older, his eyes dimmed but his mind grew brighter. He had seen kings rise and fall, temples built and crumble, and poets praised then forgotten. Yet one thing remained unchanged, the pride of men who claimed to know all. In every city he visited, there were those who wore the cloak of wisdom but carried none of its weight. They spoke with certainty about the gods, about virtue, about the nature of the world. They spoke as though truth were theirs to command. Xenophanes listened, not to mock but to understand. And when they finished, he would say softly, "No man has seen clear truth, nor will there ever be one who knows it. For even if he speaks what is true, he cannot know it as truth." Those words were a mirror held to every mind, even to mine. For in them I see the essence of philosophy itself, humility. To claim wisdom is to lose it. To admit ignorance is to begin to see. He was among the first to teach that knowledge is a journey without end, that all our understanding is but a shadow cast by light we cannot yet behold. The priests boasted that they knew the will of the gods. The poets said they spoke from divine inspiration. Xenophanes smiled and replied, "Perhaps you do. But if you do not, how would you know the difference?" It was not sarcasm, it was mercy. He offered men the gift of uncertainty, for uncertainty is the seed of wisdom. I often feel that same struggle in my own life. In Athens, many claimed to be wise: the sophists, the politicians, the orators. They sold their knowledge as a merchant sells wares, weighed and measured by coin. I asked them only questions and they grew angry, for questioning exposes the hollow places where certainty hides. In that, I am a disciple of Xenophanes, though I never met him. He taught me through the ages that truth belongs to no man. It is only borrowed for a moment of insight. He spoke against those who confused eloquence with understanding. He said, "To speak beautifully is easy. To see truly is rare." How many even now believe that cleverness is the same as wisdom? Yet cleverness decorates the mind, wisdom humbles it. There is a story told of him, that once, during a feast, a famous poet recited verses about the loves and wars of Zeus. The audience clapped and cheered. When they turned to Xenophanes for praise, he simply said, "If gods do such things, they are not gods. If they do not, why sing of them?" The laughter faded into thought. He had broken a spell not with force but with reason. He lived as a man apart, respected by some, tolerated by others, feared by a few. For nothing unsettles the false wise more than the quiet presence of one who truly seeks truth. But he did not argue for victory. His debates were not battles, they were awakenings. He knew that words meant little if they did not stir reflection. And so his criticisms were gentle, his tone kind, his humor soft. Like water wearing down a stone, he eroded arrogance with patience. He once wrote, "The gods did not reveal all things to mortals from the beginning, but through seeking they find better in time." Those words are the heartbeat of philosophy. They teach that revelation is not given once for all, but grows with our understanding. Each question we ask refines the world a little more. He did not shame the pretenders to wisdom. He pitied them, for they had mistaken applause for truth and comfort for knowledge. To be thought wise they cease to wonder, and when wonder dies, the soul grows silent. Sometimes I walk through the streets of Athens and see men arguing loudly in the marketplace. I smile and think of Xenophanes. He would have stood there too, quietly, observing, letting their words pass like waves upon stone. When they finished, he might have said, "If all speak, who listens? If all know, who learns?" That is the paradox he gave us. The more certain a man becomes, the less he sees. The more humble he becomes, the nearer he draws to truth. So let us remember him not as one who mocked, but as one who purified, who stripped knowledge of pride and returned it to wonder. For wisdom, as Xenophanes and I both have found, begins in silence and grows through questioning. And perhaps that is why the truly wise are often quiet. They have learned that every answer hides another mystery waiting to be revealed. Every thinker, no matter how luminous his mind, must one day face the silence of forgetfulness. Time, like the sea Xenophanes once studied, is patient. It washes away the names of men, leaving only their essence behind. In his final years, Xenophanes grew frail. His feet no longer carried him through the cities of Ionia as before. He had wandered for decades, and the roads had become his only home. But even a wanderer must rest, and so he settled for a time in Ionia, a quiet city of the Italian coast, far from his birthplace, far from the noise of Greece. There he lived simply. He spoke to few, taught even fewer. He watched the tides roll in, perhaps remembering the days when he had sung before kings and strangers. His name, once whispered from port to port, began to fade. The poets of Athens no longer sang of him. The priests ignored him. The world, busy with its own noise, forgot the man who had questioned its gods. And yet, even in that fading, there was peace. For Xenophanes never sought fame. He sought truth. And truth does not die with silence. It waits quietly until it is needed again. I often wonder if he felt sorrow as he watched younger men win the attention he had never known. The sophists dazzled crowds with their speeches, and the people praised them as sages. Yet they were children beside the old poet who sat by the sea, pondering the unity of all things. Perhaps he smiled at the irony that those who speak most loudly of wisdom are often the farthest from it. He had said it long ago, men imagine the gods to be born, to have voices, to wear clothes like theirs. But if oxen or lions had hands, they would draw gods in their own image. Even now, centuries later, I can feel the quiet power in those words. They pierce through time like light through deep water. When he died, there were no great funerals, no statues, no festivals in his name. The city did not ring with his praises. The sea carried away his memory, and his verses drifted like scattered leaves. but not all was lost. In Ionia there lived a young thinker, Parmenides, who would later teach that reality is one, unchanging, eternal. And if you listen closely to Parmenides' words, you can hear the echo of Xenophanes. The seed had found new soil. It is a quiet miracle how thought travels, from an old poet's heart to a young philosopher's mind, passed unseen through the fabric of time. So though the city forgot his name, the universe remembered his truth. Every thinker who seeks unity, every seeker who believes that wisdom is humbler than power, walks in Xenophanes' shadow. I know something of that, forgetting myself. In my own city, Athens, I have spoken until my voice has grown tired. I have asked men to know themselves, to love truth more than victory. And though some listen, most laugh. They call me foolish, troublesome, or mad. Yet I do not despair. For I too have learned from Xenophanes that it is not the applause of men that matters, but the endurance of an idea. There is a calm that only the forgotten know, a calm born from the understanding that all names fade, but truth remains. The stars care nothing for our monuments. The divine, as Xenophanes taught, is not flattered by temples, nor angered by silence. It simply is. And perhaps as he lay down for the last time, he did not feel forgotten at all. Perhaps he looked upon the same stars he had followed all his life and whispered, "I have seen enough." Perhaps the sea, which he once said had shaped the land, whispered back to him, folding his name into its endless song. Men may forget the poet, but the world does not forget the song. And Xenophanes' song still lingers, in the quiet moments between thought and faith, between knowing and wonder. For though his city forgot him, the ages remembered him. And every voice that seeks truth over vanity, reason over myth, carries a note of his eternal music. Among all the lessons Xenophanes left behind, none shines brighter than this, that thought and faith need not be enemies. He lived in a time when belief was built on fear, and reason was seen as rebellion. Yet he walked a path between the two, neither denying the divine nor bowing blindly before it. He sought not to destroy faith, but to purify it. I have always admired that balance. Many men, when they begin to think deeply, drift away from reverence. They grow proud in their reason, believing the mind alone can hold the universe. Others, fearful of doubt, close their eyes and call their blindness devotion. Xenophanes chose a third way, the quiet way, the way of harmony. He looked at the heavens and said, "The divine is one, perfect, unchanging, and whole. It moves all things by the thought of its mind." But then he added, "No man knows, nor will any man ever know, what is true about the gods and all things I speak of." There, within those lines, lives the gentlest wisdom. To believe in the divine order, and yet remain humble before its mystery. He showed that faith without thought becomes superstition, and thought without faith becomes emptiness. The wise soul, he said, must hold both, belief as a lantern and reason as the flame within it. When I walk through the streets of Athens and see temples rising toward the sky, I often think of him. The people light incense, whisper prayers, and offer fruit to the statues of gods shaped like men. I do not mock them, for their hearts are sincere. But I wonder how different it might be if they understood, as Xenophanes did, that the true divine is not in the marble or the fire, but in the harmony that binds all things together. He believed that the gods men worship are but reflections, shadows of their own hopes and fears. Yet he never rejected those who prayed. He simply asked them to look deeper, beyond the image, beyond the story, toward the unity that breathes through the world. He saw that to think is not to defy heaven, but to listen more clearly to its silence. For what is the mind, if not a spark of that same intelligence that orders the stars? When we reason, we do not step away from the divine, we come nearer to it. I too have tried to live by that truth. In questioning men, I do not seek to destroy their faith, only to awaken it. For the faith that is never questioned is like a well that has never been drawn from. It grows stagnant and dark. But the faith that is stirred by thought flows clear and living. Xenophanes taught that reverence begins in reflection. He did not kneel to stone, nor mock those who did. Instead, he stood quietly and asked, "If the divine is perfect, what need has it of temples? If it is eternal, what meaning has sacrifice? If it is all-knowing, why speak as if it listens like a man?" He sought not to remove the sacred from life, but to return it to everything. To see the divine in the sea and the clay, in the stars and the mind, that was his worship. And perhaps that is why, even forgotten, he was at peace. For the man who sees divinity in all things needs no altar. The whole world is his temple, every thought his prayer. When I close my eyes and imagine him, the old poet standing by the Ionian shore, the sunset painting gold upon the water, I see him not as a skeptic nor as a prophet, but as something rarer, a reconciler. One who healed the ancient wound between knowing and believing. He did not say, "Believe nothing," nor "Believe everything." He said, "Believe thoughtfully." And in that single phrase all harmony resides. For what is wisdom if not the balance between wonder and understanding? What is peace if not the stillness of a soul that honors both truth and mystery? So let us walk in that same balance, thoughtful in our faith, faithful in our thought, as Xenophanes did long before we named it philosophy. Every age thinks it is new, yet wisdom is a river that has been flowing since the dawn of thought. When Xenophanes dropped his small pebble of truth into that river, he could not have known how far its ripples would travel. He died in silence, but his words did not. They became light, faint at first, then brighter with each soul that received them. In Ionia, the young Parmenides listened to the echoes of his teacher's voice. From Xenophanes, he inherited the vision of the One, unchanging, eternal, and whole. Parmenides took that seed and made it into a doctrine, that what is, simply is and cannot come from nothing. Thus, from Xenophanes' wonder grew one of the strongest pillars of philosophy, the belief that beneath all change lies permanence, beneath all illusion, truth. Later came Heraclitus, who spoke of the flowing fire of life, that everything changes, that no man steps into the same river twice. Though he seemed to stand opposite Parmenides, he too was shaped by that early spark. The idea that the divine is in the order of things, not in the stories of men. And then came men like Anaxagoras, Empedocles, and finally Plato, my dear student. Each of them, knowingly or not, carried within them the faint glow of Xenophanes' fire. They sought unity, harmony, and the eternal beneath the fleeting. Such is the way of truth. It never shouts. It simply passes quietly from soul to soul, like a candle lit in darkness. I have often reflected that philosophy itself is this lineage of light, each thinker a torchbearer, his flame borrowed from one who walked before him. The body dies, the words fade, the temples fall, but the light remains, flowing through generations like breath through the ages. Sometimes I wonder if Xenophanes knew he was kindling something timeless. He did not write vast treatises or build schools. He spoke in verses, short, simple, poetic truths. Yet it is often in the smallest words that eternity hides. He taught men to look beyond the gods and see the divine. He taught thinkers to look beyond opinion and see the unity of being. He taught poets to look beyond beauty and see truth. Without him, the road from myth to philosophy might have taken longer, or perhaps never have been walked at all. He was the bridge, the one who carried the world from song into reason, from imagination into insight. I imagine him now as a lantern in the ancient night. His light may have been faint, but even a faint light changes everything it touches. It draws travelers forward, shows the next few steps, and gives courage to those who follow. I too have felt his light upon me. Though we are divided by centuries, his thought guided mine. When I taught that wisdom begins in admitting ignorance, I was echoing Xenophanes' humility. When I said that the soul should care for itself more than for wealth or power, I was following his path of moderation. And when I spoke of the divine order of the world, not as myth but as reason, I was walking the same road he began. That is how truth moves, quietly, invisibly through the generations. It does not need monuments. It lives in the mind of anyone who pauses to wonder. Even you who listen now are part of that same river of light. For as you rest and listen, the thoughts of a man who lived 25 centuries ago pass through me, and now through you. You are the newest bearer of the flame. Perhaps that is what Xenophanes hoped for, not that he would be remembered by name, but that his question would never die. What is truly divine and what is merely man's reflection? That question is still alive. It shines through every search for meaning, every act of humility, every quiet moment when a soul looks at the stars and feels both small and infinite. The line of light continues through philosophers, poets, teachers, and listeners, and tonight it touches you. Hold it gently. It is older than time, yet as new as the thought you will think after this story ends. The greatest discovery Xenophanes gave to the world was not that the gods were unlike men, but that men had mistaken their own reflections for gods. He showed us that our minds, like still water, can reflect truth, but when stirred by pride or fear, they distort it. He taught that if we wish to understand the divine or even ourselves, we must first quiet the ripples. We must learn to see not what we wish to see, but what is. When I speak with my students in the Agora, I often tell them, the unexamined life is not worth living. But I think Xenophanes would have said it more gently. The unexamined life is a shadow chasing its own shape. For him, the world was a mirror of the mind, and the mind a mirror of the world. If one was clouded, so was the other. He saw that men create their gods, their beliefs, their desires, all in their own image, and then worship them as if they were eternal. He asked us to look inward and see how much of our heaven is merely our own imagination painted upon the sky. When a man looks at himself honestly, without pride or despair, he sees how small he is, yet also how infinite his capacity for understanding. This is the paradox of the soul, that within its brief life burns a spark that seeks what is timeless. Xenophanes knew this. He said that the divine sees all over, thinks all over, and hears all over. What he meant, I think, was not that a God watches us from above, but that understanding itself, pure awareness, is divine. When we think clearly, when we act justly, when we love truth for its own sake, we participate in that awareness. In those moments, the divine is not beyond us. It is us as we are at our best. He was the first to turn men's eyes from Olympus to the mirror within. He showed that to seek the divine in the sky is folly if one has not first found harmony within the heart. I often imagine him speaking to a crowd of believers, saying not, "Your gods are false," but "Look at yourselves, your gods are your desires dressed in eternity." And perhaps he smiled, not with arrogance, but with compassion, for he knew that every man must first learn through illusion before he can awaken to truth. In his humility, he left us no commandments, only questions. He asked, "What is truth? What is knowing? How do we see clearly when our sight is shaped by what we long to see?" Those questions remain with us still. They are the same I ask in Athens, the same you ask in your own quiet thoughts. We are all mirrors, and the work of philosophy is to polish the glass, slowly, patiently, until it reflects the light without distortion. Some never begin. Others stop when they see their own face and mistake it for the divine. But the wise continue, not for glory but for clarity, until the reflection disappears and what remains is only light. When Xenophanes gazed at the sea, he saw in its surface the shimmer of the infinite. When he looked at the stars, he saw order, not ornament. When he looked within, he saw that same order mirrored in his own reason. And thus he realized, the divine is not elsewhere, it is here within the act of seeing itself. I tell you this so that as you drift toward sleep, you may understand that your own mind, calm and still, is also a mirror. You need not climb mountains or pray in temples to find the sacred. You need only look inward, until the noise of the world fades and you see quietly that everything you sought was already within you. Xenophanes once said that even if a man were to speak the perfect truth, he could never know it as truth, yet to seek it is the highest calling. That seeking is the mirror's work, and in that seeking we become what we admire. So tonight, as you listen, let your thoughts grow clear as still water. Let the ripples settle. Let the mirror of your mind shine softly beneath the stars. And know, as Xenophanes knew, that to look within is to glimpse the infinite reflected in the human soul. Night has deepened now and the world grows still. The stars above shimmer like distant embers, each one a silent witness to the long journey of thought that began so many centuries ago. And here, in the hush between breaths, I speak to you as Xenophanes once spoke to the sea, softly without urgency, knowing that wisdom travels not by force, but by calm persistence. He was only a man, and yet through his gentle questioning, he opened a doorway that still stands open today. He showed that truth is not thunder in the sky or fire from the heavens. It is the quiet knowing that all things are one, that what lives and what dies, what begins and what ends, all belong to the same unbroken whole. I often think that in his final days, Xenophanes must have felt this truth like a soft wind upon his face. He had walked through a world of noise, of arguments, myths, and pride, and he had answered all of it not with anger but with clarity. He did not build temples, he built insight. He did not promise salvation, he offered understanding. And when his voice grew old, his silence spoke for him. Perhaps he sat one evening by the shore, the sun descending in fire over the Ionian Sea. The air was still. The waves whispered at his feet. He closed his eyes, and in that moment, the distance between God and man vanished. He felt, as I have often felt, that to be alive is miracle enough, that to think, to see, to love, is itself a form of prayer. The world around him shimmered with unity. The sea he once said had shaped the land now gleamed gold beneath the fading light. The earth, the wind, the stars, and his own breath, all were threads of one vast tapestry, woven by a hand unseen but always present. And perhaps with that awareness he smiled. Not the smile of triumph but of peace. For he had learned that the true victory of the mind is not to know everything, but to rest in the knowing that there is more to know. That is the quiet of understanding, not the silence of ignorance but the serenity of wisdom. to live with mystery yet without fear, to question the heavens yet still feel reverence for their beauty, to walk alone yet feel at home in the company of truth. I too have walked this path, and I tell you, as Xenophanes might have told me, there is no need to rush toward answers. Let your questions be like the tide, coming and going, polishing the mind as waves polish the shore. Every doubt you hold is a prayer for clarity. Every wonder is an offering to the divine reason that moves through all things. So rest now. Let your thoughts grow slow and warm. The same quiet that embraced Xenophanes now surrounds you. You are part of the same story, another voice in the long conversation between wonder and wisdom, between man and the eternal. When you wake, remember this. The gods may not walk among us, but their truth breathes through every living thing. The divine is not elsewhere, it is here in the calm of your heart, in the breath that joins you to the world. And as your eyes grow heavy, remember the poet from Colophon, the wanderer who laughed at the gods and found the divine in all that is. He walked with open eyes, spoke with an open heart, and left behind a trail of light that still reaches us tonight. Sleep then in that light. Let his wisdom cradle your thoughts. Let his peace become your own. For the search is never over, but for now it can rest. Good night, dear listener. May the stillness of Xenophanes guide you, and may the quiet of understanding carry you gently into dreams.